What Steve just said there kind of fits in with what I want to talk about this morning, about God having patience. Word that gets used a lot, at least in the New Testament, is long-suffering, which until I started preaching, I never really gave much thought to it, the meaning behind that, but long-suffering is patience. And it says over and over that God has long-suffering for the world. He has patience for the world. And eventually this world will come to an end, but in the meantime, he's going to be patient with us. And he's going to be patient for the purpose of, I believe, what it says in the New Testament is that until as many as can be saved are saved. In the end, not everyone will be. But while we are here, God has patience with the world. And God has long-suffering. God has patience with each of us as individuals. Like Steve was talking about that story in the Bible. And it's never ending. So that kind of ties in with this idea I wanted to talk about this morning, providence. So providence is from Latin providentia. Or in the Greek, how it gets used in the New Testament, it's prognoia, and it means foresight or making provision beforehand. So it's, most simply put, it's having a plan. Usually how we use it is, how I want to talk about it this morning, is talking about God's providence. Some people use the word interchangeably with fate, the idea that there is some plan or reason behind things, whether or not people believe that it's God who created the plan or reason. Now, in contrast with that idea that God has a plan for everything and he has control over everything, as it says in Matthew, even the hairs on your head are numbered. So God is in every little tiny decision that we make throughout the day, as well as the major decisions that affect the world to a greater level. But the other side of the coin is that man has free will. And people have been battling with this idea for thousands of years, not just in the Christian faith, but over the centuries of people who have believed in other gods or thought the world ran a different way. There is still this contrast between free will versus the gods having a plan. Well, how are we able to do what we want if God already knows what is going to be done? Then does that mean I really have a choice to begin with? And some people take that another direction, that's at least nihilism, not believing in anything, not caring about anything. Because if everything's preordained, then what's the point of my existence? Why, if I can't even make my decisions for myself, then what's the point? Some people take it in that direction. And other people take it in the other direction, to the extreme, and say, I make my own fate. That's the people who say that they're self-made. They're the ones that they know that they can control their own destiny. Now, to a degree, I think a reasonable person can take a little bit from both ends of that spectrum. And so the idea of patience, the long-suffering, I think that has a little bit to do with how those two things work together. The things that seem like they shouldn't work together. Do we have free will, or is everything predetermined? It's God's long-suffering that makes those able to happen in the same realm. Let's turn to Proverbs, the 21st chapter, 21st Proverb. Proverbs 21. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts. To do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. And high look and a proud heart, and the plowing of the wicked is sin. The thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of everyone that is hasty only to want. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity tossed to and fro of them that seek death. The robbery of the wicked shall destroy them, because they refuse to do judgment. The way of man is froward and strange, but as for the pure, the work is right. It is better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. The soul of the wicked desireth evil, his neighbor findeth no favor in his eyes. When the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise, and when the wise is instructed, he receiveth knowledge. The righteous man wisely considereth the house of the wicked, but God overthroweth the wicked for their wickedness. Whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but shall not be heard. A gift in secret pacifieth anger, and a reward in the bosom strong wrath. It is joy to the just to do judgment, but destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. The man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. The wicked shall be a ransom for the righteous, and the transgressor for the upright. It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman. There is a treasure to be desired, and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. He that followeth after righteousness and mercy findeth life, righteousness, and honor. A wise man scaleth the city of the mighty, and casteth down the strength of the confidence thereof. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. Proud and haughty scorner is his name, who dealeth in proud wrath. The desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. He coveteth greedily all the day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. The sacrifice of the wicked is abomination. How much more when he bringeth it with a wicked mind? A false witness shall perish, but the man that heareth speaketh constantly. A wicked man hardeneth his face, but as for the upright, he directeth his way. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. That chapter reads like most of Proverbs, which, again, these are words of wisdom that were passed down orally through generations until finally somebody wrote them down. A lot of it was attested to King Solomon, who is deemed the wisest man alive at the time, but really this is like a whole group of people. This is hundreds of years of the lessons that they have passed down to their children, that they have passed down, and then eventually they wrote it down, and that's what became the book of Proverbs. And every one of these lessons, and each one of the chapters as they're broken up, it reads similarly. There's this or that. This is good, but this is bad. Do this, and this will happen. It's the same structure through all of it. And then there'll be several lessons. Some of them seem like they have nothing to do with each other, just right next to each other. And then as a chapter, they're kind of tied together with a theme. And one of the things that I think is happening here in the 21st is they use this, and I don't think this is meant to be part of the advice given, maybe it was, but I think it's more meant to be an analogy that ties everything else together. It's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a white house. And then it goes on the next time it references that, and it says it's better to live in the wilderness than no, it's something along the same lines. But they're using it there, it's their analogy saying it's living in a house, being close to somebody or something that you have contention with. You're better off being alone in a corner. You're better off being in wilderness than battling between I think philosophers call duality. You know, having two things together at once. And so when I read this now, I see it as partially an attempt at an explanation of this idea of providence and free will working together, and how they seem to be at odds with each other, but they're not really. And the way the whole thing is framed is, I think it's a really beautiful metaphor in the first couple of verses there. It says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. Or another translation puts it, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Or the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels toward all who please him. It's the idea, it's the king's heart, king's desires and tensions. That's what we use the heart to describe, the things that we really want, the things that we intend. That's the water. It's not just still water, it's flowing water. It's something that's constantly moving, constantly making decisions to go this way or that way. But there are a few rules around that. For one, water, as we know it here on earth, flows downhill. It doesn't go uphill unless there's something pushing it uphill. Water can hold things afloat, but other things can sink within water. So this water, this river, this stream, this channel, flows out from the king's heart. It's his. He's directing it. But it has to follow these rules that the water follows. But at the same time, or in addition to that, it's in the hand of the Lord. Or as it says, the other translation, it flows through the hand. And he turneth it whithersoever he will. So if you think of that, it's the heart, the desires, the free will, in this case of the king. He has choices, he has decisions that he can make, but he's limited in the way that he can do it because there are certain parameters that must be followed. You may want to fly, but here on Earth, we know that the laws of gravity will not allow that unless you use technology to alter it a certain way. There's certain rules that you have to operate within. But then God also has his direct hand in some of those rules and can change it how he wishes, when he wishes. So that idea is just kind of powerful to me because it's flowing water. I see it something that's constantly moving. And you can't necessarily stop it, but you can direct it. You know, what got me thinking about this concept to begin with this week. It's something that I think about a lot, especially when it pops up sort of right in front of me. The idea that people say everything happens for a reason. You don't understand why things go a certain way sometimes until afterwards you're able to look back and think, oh wow, if this hadn't happened, then this hadn't happened. If that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. As the cliche goes, hindsight is 20/20. It's easy to see that when we look back on it sometimes. Sometimes we still don't have all the pieces. There's not enough time between. We're not able to see it. Other times, we're never going to be able to look back and figure out all the reasons that led to it. But like I say in here often, God gives us little glimpses. We are not going to be, God's plan is not going to be revealed till the end of times. And I believe at that point, when the judgment comes and we're in His presence, everything's going to be shared with us. It's all going to make sense. We're going to be able to look back on everything and see all the things that God did and planned, and it's going to make sense to us. Right now we are human. We are in this realm of existence, this world, so we can only see the things that we have the ability to see as human beings, with the laws of nature as they are, and the abilities of our brain to put things together is limited to a certain degree. But every now and then we get little glimpses. When we do, a lot of people think of it as like magic, or people use the word fate. But the phrase that they always use is, there's a reason behind everything. And it goes for, believers or non-believers. Usually when believers say that, they're attributing that reason to God, at least somewhat. There's this belief that if God has control over everything, then there's a reason behind it, because He's an intelligent creator and has a design, and that is purpose. But without the belief in the intelligent design, people will still recognize that there's some kind of plan, something that comes together, but there's a reason behind it. But they call it fate, and leave it to be this kind of blind thing that just happens randomly. But you can't really use the phrase, there's a reason behind everything, and also believe that all those puzzle pieces came together just out of fate without some design. And that's because to say that there's a reason means to say that there is intelligence behind it. Reason doesn't exist in a vacuum. Reason is a decision that is made based on information that you have. So when we say there's a reason behind everything, we're acknowledging that somebody, something made a decision based on the information that they had a reason to do something. That idea fascinates me, because I think somewhere in there is the key to those who are struggling with whether or not they believe in the existence of God or in Christ, and whether or not they do. We think of things in black and white. It's this or it's that. There's death and there's life, and those two things are different in our eyes, but in God's eyes, I don't believe they are. They're just something along the course of a timeline. The events that take place. It's not an end and a beginning in His eyes. It is in ours, because that's all we can fathom right here, is how we began and to some degree how we're going to end. So as humans, that's the only way that we can really try to wrap our heads around it. It is or it isn't. It's this or it's that. And that's why we have that problem. It's free will, or it's somebody designed it, planned it, somebody had a reason for it. And for some reason, as humans, we just can't grasp the idea that it could be both. And so, back to what brought me to this, there's a couple of things. But this week, I had a client at work who I hadn't spent a lot of time getting to know him other than just what I needed to know in order to do the job. And then we were sitting in court, actually in the process of picking a jury for a trial. And at one point, as soon as the court went into recess, we had a break, my client, he turned to me and he said, "Are you a pastor?" And I said, "Yeah, how'd you know that? Or did you figure that out?" And he said that his friend was in Tulare. He was talking to them about his lawyer from the public defender's office. And they said that they told him that they thought that I was a good attorney and that they thought I was a preacher also. And I don't know that person, so I talked with my client trying to figure out wonder how that happened. Did I represent somebody that was related to that person in Tulare? Is it because of my connection through Wasco? Somebody in Wasco knows somebody in Tulare. I'll talk with some of my clients sometimes about my personal life, and especially when clients bring up the fact that they're a Christian, we'll talk openly about that, how that affects their decisions. And I believe that, here we go to the reason part, the reason I was drawn to that line of work is the same reason I think that I'm standing here right now. There's some kind of purpose there for me. And I think the job that I have there is not really different than the job that I have here. It's counseling, it's giving people advice. And a lot of the people in the situation, when I meet them, they're looking for advice. They're not just legally how to handle the situation that they're in, but how to handle what put them in a particular spot in life. And whether or not God has anything to do with that. So I'll get into that conversation with some people sometimes, but I'm usually not forthcoming with it. So I don't know where a person in Tulare who knew this person, who knew someone who I'm now representing who lives in Bakersfield, put those things together, but it kind of woke me up for a minute when you said that, because all those things started firing through my mind. And I've talked about that in here before, I think, when I've given testimony, that this idea that every now and then you have those moments where you get those glimpses, and I call it, I see it as like seeing the face of God in the moment, when you feel like God is in that moment right there. I think we've all, hopefully, at some time or another, experienced something. It's that same feeling that people say when they say, "Oh, wow, I guess there's a reason for everything." It's almost like a magical feeling, and people like that feeling. It's the same feeling that people get when they're saved. After you've been baptized, it's this rush of emotion. It's the reason why so many churches have the singing and dancing and speaking in tongues, being overcome with emotion, all of that is because of that feeling, the overwhelming feeling that comes over you when you have that connection with God in the moment, when you see the face of God, the way I like to put it. And it's easy to rest on that feeling and think about it and be fascinated and feel good. But every time you receive one of those, whether it's because you feel that way because you've just been saved, whether it's because you feel that way because, oh, I prayed for an answer to this question, and there's an answer, and you recognize that you got the answer to it. The first thing I do when I see that is I kind of get a smile over my face. I'll even just say it out loud sometimes. I God. And it's a really special feeling. But the very next thing I'll do is to be thankful for something and then ask what I'm supposed to do with it. And ask God to direct me with whatever information that He's given me. Hopefully I try to remember to do that in those moments. So in that moment, I don't know why I was supposed to pay more attention to what I was doing right then at the moment, but I still don't. But when we left court that day, got into a conversation with my client on a little bit more personal level, learned a little bit more about him. He was a former Marine, or I guess he was a Marine, and his life prior to where he is today was very similar to a friend of mine in law school, who I've talked about in here, who was a Marine who committed suicide. And talking to him for a moment was almost like I was talking to my friend. I was hearing the same things coming out of his mouth. But I could see a lot of those similar things in him. And we started talking about church a little bit, and how he grew up in a church, and he left and gone back a few times, and he's questioned things. He's had his moments like, why would a loving God allow this to happen? Which is a lot of people, when they lose faith, that's why. Because they think that, well, if God's in control of everything, why did He let my child die? If God's in control of everything, then why did this happen? That makes people angry a lot of times. It makes people hopeless. It makes people feel like even if they do believe in a God, well, I don't like you then. Like, you're not doing anything for me. I lost my house and my job, and you didn't step in even though I prayed for it and I asked for it. So I acknowledge that you exist, but I want nothing to do with you. Some people have that kind of attitude towards it. And I've always wanted to, because I've encountered multiple people who have been in that situation. People have asked me that question before when they realize that I'm a Christian, and they want to have a conversation. Sometimes people will talk about it, really just to be provocative, try to provoke you. And other times they're seriously looking for an answer that I don't think any human actually has when they say something like, why would God allow this to happen? If you believe that God's in control of everything, why these mass atrocities, why does genocide happen? Why does war happen? Now, my general answer and understanding to that has always been that because of free will. God put us here, and He gave us free will. And I believe the Bible teaches that the evil that takes place here on earth God's hand is in it, in that I guess he allows it to happen. He doesn't cause it. But I've struggled with this whole idea because I feel like if you could figure out how to explain that in a way that would satisfy everybody, basically if you could explain God's plan to everyone, I guess is really what it is, and it'd be easy for everyone to believe. So anyway, I talked to this client of mine a little bit, some of those kind of ideas. He was actually talking about going back to school, and he said his family member had talked to him about becoming a pastor. There were a lot of other things about the conversation that we had and this whole interaction that I won't share, but there were several little moments that just kept coming one after another. These little things like, wow, that makes sense to me for this reason. Like, wow, this is important right now for this reason. I just prayed about that like 3 days ago, and now you're saying something about that to me. All of these, I mean, thousands, probably, of these little thoughts going off in my mind over the course of a 45-minute, hour-long conversation. And like I said, I don't know what to do with all of that right now, other than talking to him the way that I did, and I'll continue to. But I've taken that moment. I've felt, kind of mystical, magical feeling about it, like, wow, that's neat. And I've thanked God for it. And I ask God now for me to learn how I can use whatever that is that he's given me, these different connections, to use it in some way to further his plan. Because, as we're told several times in the New Testament, we're given gifts. We're expected to use those towards his goodwill. And that's what I want to do. So, anyway, that got me thinking about this whole, the purpose of everything, the providence and everything. And it brought me here. I want to go back to Genesis 50. This is about the story of Joseph. And how he was basically sold into subjection to the Egyptians and became an Egyptian, and then later on ran into his brothers, and there was both this sense of evil that had been done on the part of human beings towards another person, but at the same time, providence. Something to do with God having a plan behind it all, even though there was really a horrible atrocity committed. And so the 50th chapter begins, and Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. And remember, we're talking about Jacob here. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die, In my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan, there shalt thou bury me. Now therefore let me go up, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury thy father, according as he made thee swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the house of Joseph and his brethren in his father's house. Only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. Wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond Jordan. And his sons did unto him according as he commanded them. For his sons carried him into the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought with the field for a possession of a burying place of Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. And Joseph returned into Egypt, he and his brethren, and all that went up with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy burden and their sin, for they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me. But God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. As for you, ye thought evil against me. You meant evil against me. You meant to do me harm. But God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, in order to preserve these people's lives. So that was a moment where Joseph was given one of those high God moments where things were put together for him and made sense. The suffering that he had gone through, the inability to understand why he was in the position that he was in, why God would allow things to happen to him. He had a partial answer at that point in time. And what did he do with it? He forgave the wrongdoings against him because he recognized that without those, he would not be in a position today to do good for his people, that is, to do God's work. Maybe that's part of the reason why, especially, once we've been saved, we're expected to forgive. It's because someone who's done us wrong, maybe the wrong that they did to us, and the end had to happen for our benefit. Or if not for our benefit, maybe for their benefit. I don't know, maybe someone wrongs you and because of it they learn something from it. Or because of what happens to you based on what somebody did to you, you raise your children a certain way and that child grows up to have a conversation with somebody one day, and the person who had the conversation meets 5 people in another country, and those 5 people meet one person who becomes a ruler of a nation. And something that they learned from those generations before, from people who met people who talked to people, affected somebody who affected thousands of people. A cool analogy that I read is the throwing of the dice. It's something used throughout the Bible is the casting of lots. And from what I've read, we don't actually know, and like the biblical practice of casting of lots, exactly what it is to what they were referring to, but we know there were several games. It was like drawing straws, and there was something where they like threw sticks. It was the same thing of like pulling the short straw, and I think if the short stick landed on top, it meant something instead of the other thing. And I guess there were several games of chance like that. And when they talk about casting lots in the Bible, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about rolling the dice, essentially. That's our modern equivalent, is saying it's a roll of the dice. It's a flip of the coin. And it actually says in Proverbs 16:33 says that the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. So it's this idea of leaving it to chance, but there's the understanding that chance, as we call it, is still controlled by God. And I preached about that a while back in relation to some other things, but a lot of times in the Bible, when they talk about casting lots, that's why they did it. In Hebrew culture, and even the new Christian culture, generations after Jesus, it was not an idea that I'm leaving it up to a gamble. I can't make up my mind, so I'm just going to flip up the coin and let blind fate, let chance take over. That was their way of leaving it to God. They're saying that this decision can be made by God. Now we talk about leaving something to a roll of the dice or flip of the coin as just total random chance, and people use it as a way to dismiss responsibility. You don't want to be responsible for the negative things that might happen to your because of your decision. Usually people want to be responsible for the positive things that happen because of your decision. And other times, it's just you don't want to make the wrong choice. So people leave it up to chance. A lot of times people do that by not doing anything at all. So, hey, it'll work itself out. Basically, it's going to be solved by other people doing things, and I don't want to have my hand in it for one reason or another. But the roll of the dice analogy, if you think about that, for me, it helps explain, just like the metaphor of the water through the hand, the idea of free will, while at the same time, God having a plan. I believe that you throw a dice, God knows what number it's going to land on. God can control what number it's going to land on. I believe that I can control to a degree what number it can land on. It's kind of fascinating. There are people out there that study dice rolls, and they've actually affected the probability. There's this general assumption, that it's completely random. You roll a dice 1,000 times, and you're going to end up basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, relatively all the same amount of times. That's how chance is supposed to work. But if you think about it, if you're capable, the reason that it's chance, because of all the variables that affect it, when they all come together, they somehow cancel each other out. But if you can control those variables, and this is what people actually try to do. I mean, you see it if you've ever thrown dice in a casino people will hold the dice the same way every time. If you could be so controlled and calculated that you moved your arm every single time the exact same way, and every single time the dice landed the exact same way, and every single time the breeze coming from the air conditioner was the exact same, and every single time the felt on the table had the exact same amount of moisture and humidity from the air, and every single time the ink on the felt with the numbers touched the dice at exactly the same point. If you could figure out all of those factors, you could make a die land on the same number every time. When you throw it, and even if you just think you're leaving it to random chance, you're not trying to control it, you throw the dice, that was still done by your hand. You threw those dice. You made the decision to pick up the dice in the first place. You made the decision to throw them. You made the decision how to throw them. You had some silly superstition about how you did it. You made the decision of whether if you shouldn't have done it, but you did it anyway. But beyond that, God is controlling those billions and billions and billions of factors that influence. God is controlling the muscles in my arm and my fingers and the tendons that connect them, and everything that happened over the last 40 years of my life to affect this arm and those fingers touching that thing. The calluses on my fingertips. The fact that 15 years ago I closed the knife on my finger, and so there's a scar here that makes a little bump and a ridge. Every little possible detail, that's just about the arm, not considering all those surrounding environmental factors, the air, everything that could affect that. God has design behind all that, but at the same time, I have agency. I have free will. I can choose to throw the dice or not. God already knows if I'm going to do it or not. God already knows how it's going to end. But for me, it's still a choice. It's still a decision. And so I think people have the problem with reconciling those two things because they're trying to look at it from the same perspective. They're trying to understand all of those outside environmental factors at the same time as the person holding the dice, and you can't. We get better and better at it the more God allows us to learn, through science, understanding the laws of nature, and that you can manipulate certain things certain ways, and use technology to change rules about certain things. We get closer and closer to understanding how things work. We're able to look at the subatomic structure of atoms that make up particles. Talking about the roll of the dice, God controls the acrylic or plastic in that dice. Each little particle with billions of particles made up of billions of atoms, made up of billions of subatomic particles in there, when they're moving and how they're moving and how they react. And even though we can understand pieces of it, we're never going to understand all of it. So one, you're never going to have an answer to, I don't believe, to how we reconcile the two of those things. But I think the best way that you can wrap your head around it is that when I see it through my eyes, I have a choice. When God sees it through his eyes, he knows what I'm going to do. He didn't make me do it, but he controlled all of those factors around. And it says every number on our head or every hair on our head is numbered. I believe God intervenes in daily life. I believe God allows bad things to happen to you so that something else can happen to you later or happen to somebody else later, maybe thousands of years from now, it affects it somehow. One other analogy I want to share something I preached on before too, is the idea of so many scientists and philosophers nowadays, they talk about this idea of called a simulation theory. Now that we have this understanding of computers and basically we can call it a fictional world because we created it in a game or something like that. But we've created, say, a video game for an example. We've created these different characters. And when someone makes a video game, they program the computer that this particular character is always going to do this, and he reacts this way and reacts that way. If your character meets this character, this is how they're going to interact. If your character does this, this is what's going to happen. They make these rules for how the game works. But then the person playing the game is allowed to make choices within those rules. And there's this idea of movies, The Matrix was the most popular one years back that did it. The idea of what if we are living in one of those simulations? What if this world is fake and we're in a video game and we don't understand it? Another movie that came out recently was Free Guy, which was a fun movie. Ryan Reynolds in it. And he played one of those characters that was within the game, had certain rules that he had to follow, and then there was somebody playing the game. But people have theorized, maybe we're all just characters in this game that somebody created, and maybe that's why Jesus Christ was what he was. He was both God and human at the same time. Maybe the person who made the video game, that was his player in the game, and we're all, characters that have to interact over these thousands of years, but he was playing the game with the character, Jesus Christ. I find it funny when I hear that a lot of these concepts are way beyond my comprehension when people talk about it. But I have to sit back and laugh because what people are describing is what I already knew, what I read in my Bible. It's just a different way of saying it. Is you call it a video game, call it its life, call it a computer programmer, God. I don't know, maybe he looks like a human being, I don't know. It says we're made in his image. I don't know if that means a physical image. I think it means that we are made, I gave a whole sermon on that idea that we are made to think and feel. But maybe there is, maybe God is a human being who's working on a computer like how we understand computers. Does it matter? I think that just explains another way of what people have been preaching for thousands of years, that there is a designer. We don't know his plans, his design, what he looks like, what the world is outside of our world. Believe that God has spoken through other people in the Bible in order to help us understand some of it so that we can help God's plan move forward in the way that he wants it to. But when I see people learning this, through studying technology and science and having a greater understanding about how things work, I just see everything coming full circle. And maybe eventually that's how we're going to prove to the people who don't believe that there's a God who controls everything at the same time that we have free will. Maybe that's how it comes about that people finally understand it. Anyway, I know that's kind of out there, but illustration or an analogy, I think it sums it up pretty well. We are in this world, this game. Certain rules have to be followed because that's how it was designed. I always use gravity as an example. I drop something here. I'm almost 100% certain it's going to fall to the ground unless in that exact moment gravity stops for some reason or another, or a bird swoops in and grabs it and flies away with it. But all of those millions of possibilities, my brain has somehow gone through, nope, that's not going to happen, nope, that's not going to happen, nope, that's not going to happen, it's probably going to fall on the ground. And based on that, I can live my life based on that understanding. But God has the ability to manipulate any of those things at any time that He wants. He already has. He has already planned when that's going to happen. I just don't have that knowledge. So I pray like, I think it's Paul who said it, said, don't go into the city and say, I'm going to do this or that tomorrow. No, say, God willing, I'm going to do this or that tomorrow. Because what I think is important in that situation is the acceptance that what God wants to happen is going to happen no matter what. And when you fight against that and try to make your own decisions, it's going to be more difficult for you, and I think that's how God helps. That's why God gives people trials in order to learn things about themselves, in order to hopefully eventually come closer to Him. But the more that you can roll with that idea, the more that you can accept that God is pulling the strings, that God has it all laid out before you. Okay, God, I'm going to go along with it. You help me. Give me some of those little high moments here and there. Let me know if I'm doing it right, if I'm doing it wrong, if I need to turn right, if I need to turn left. And sometimes, this goes back to something that our pastor said several times in this church. You know, sometimes when you think you have one of those moments, you might not be talking to God, so you have to be cautious of that too. Sometimes you're just talking to yourself. Sometimes you're talking to a memory that you have, that voice in your head that's always happening. Sometimes it's just you. But at the same time, God made that you. God put that there. And I believe other times, it's like little hints, you know, here and there. Like, hey, listen, do this, do this. You go along with it, and okay, that's God got His point across. And then maybe there's other times where He said, no, that's not God's plan. And if it actually is, and God wants you to know it, He's going to slap you in the face a little bit harder sometimes to get the point across. But I believe that God has a plan for everything and everyone, and I believe that bad things happen in this world because we do them, because we have the ability and the choices to make things happen. And as I preached a few weeks ago, I believe that that's influenced sometimes also by Satan. I believe that the devil works within this world to influence people the same way that God can. It's just that God has control over the whole thing, while evil can only influence little parts of it, if it's allowed to. And I believe that all of that can be happening at the same time. I don't understand how. I don't think anybody's ever going to until it comes to an end. I always pray and ask for a way to try to explain that, because I think if I could explain that to other people, it would help people. I think it would help me to understand it. I think it would bring other people to God. But He said it's easy for those who have seen to believe. He wants those who haven't seen to have faith. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for bringing us together here today. Please help us to remember throughout our lives that you have given us the ability to make decisions. You've given us power and influence over this world that you have created. And you have given us a conscience and the ability to choose how we use those powers. Please, God, help us to remember throughout our daily lives to keep you present in our minds when making those daily choices, so that we can further good in this world, so that we can help other people, and so that we can move this creation in a positive direction as a whole. We thank you for giving all of these gifts here on this world, and we pray that you show us how to use them for your benefit, so that we can show our gratitude. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.